Hello, this is Jackie Cohen, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Monday, June 15th issue of the Democrat Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Winds of Change. Trump's $2 billion offshore wind buy-off threatens jobs, investment, and energy supply. The United States is in a bizarre situation in 2026. It's facing a looming energy shortage, yet the Trump administration is making deals to pay offshore wind developers nearly $2 billion in taxpayer money to walk away from energy projects. These politically motivated moves are costing Americans far more than just the buyouts. Communities have been laying the groundwork for offshore energy projects for years. Offshore wind development brings jobs and economic development that reshape regional economies, with the scale of public and private investment reaching into the hundreds of billions of dollars over years. East Coast communities have built up ports to support the industry and launched job training programs to prepare workers. Construction, maintenance, and shipping businesses have sprung up, along with secondary businesses that support the industry. Losing the projects and the threat of losing other planned wind farms will also likely mean higher energy prices. And while some offshore wind farms are moving ahead, developers must account for both lost momentum and increased uncertainty from the Trump administration. As a result, Americans will bear the economic brunt of these decisions for decades ahead. How America got to this point. To understand how the United States arrived in this predicament, let's take a step back. In March 2023, leaders from 3 U.S. federal agencies under the Biden administration met with the CEOs from American technology and manufacturing giants Microsoft, Amazon, Ford, GM, Dow Chemical, and GE at the annual ARPAE Energy Innovation Summit, under the banner of Affordable, Reliable, and Secure American-Made Energy. They agreed on a key point. The nation was staring down a severe shortage of electrons to drive American businesses forward. Fortunately, solutions abounded. Enormous amounts of onshore wind and solar power had been developed during the previous 5 years. More than 80% of all new power additions to the U.S. grid had come from these two sources. Particularly exciting were plans to build large offshore wind farms up and down the eastern seaboard. Taken together, the wind farms would generate 30 gigawatts of new power by 2030, enough to power more than 10 million homes and reduce volatility in energy pricing, thanks to long-term power purchase agreements. The United States had one small wind farm at the time, off Rhode Island, and 2 wind turbines off Virginia. But Europe had been operating large offshore wind projects for over 2 decades and was building more. In the months following the 2023 meeting, leasing and permitting for the U.S. mega projects continued, and in some areas construction got underway. Then, the second Trump administration arrived in 2025. As president, Donald Trump immediately issued an executive order to halt offshore wind lease sales and any approvals, permits, or loans for wind farms. He had made his disdain for wind power clear ever since he lost a fight to stop construction of a small wind farm near his golf course in Scotland in the 2010s. After a federal judge declared Trump's executive order unconstitutional in December 2025, the administration shifted strategies. In March 2026, news outlets began reporting on deals struck in which the federal government would pay 3 offshore wind project developers hundreds of millions of dollars to cease development of their permitted projects, agree not to build others, and repurpose the funds toward fossil fuel projects. According to reported discussions involving the French energy company Total Energies, the money would be paid out through the Department of Interior's Judgment Fund, intended for payment of legal settlements despite there not being any active litigation with Total Energies. The other projects agreeing to Trump's buyouts as of early May were Golden State Wind in California and Blue Point Wind off New Jersey and New York. Both are co-owned by Ocean Winds, a joint venture of the French energy company Engie and EDP Renewables, headquartered in Spain. The California Energy Commission and members of Congress are now investigating the moves. Offshore wind means local investment. Regardless of whether these buyouts are even legal, the losing parties will be the American taxpayers and a U.S. economy that needs more electrons on the grid, not fewer. One analysis projected that deploying 40 gigawatts along the East Coast by 2035 would generate roughly $140 billion in investment, much of it concentrated in port infrastructure and supply chain development. New York, in early 2026, announced a $300 million state grant program to expand port infrastructure supporting offshore wind. And the New Jersey wind port represents an investment exceeding $600 million to enable manufacturing and assembly of turbines. In 2025, California state lawmakers authorized $225.7 million in spending for offshore wind ports and related facilities. For these projects to pay off for local communities, however, the regions will need to see development of wind farms. Killing jobs. The cancellations of the planned projects also take jobs away from hard-working blue-collar Americans. The construction and installation of offshore wind turbines requires the expertise of skilled electrical workers, pipe fitters, welders, pile drivers, iron workers, machinists, and carpenters. Future offshore wind costs depend on investments today. As infrastructure is established and expertise grows, each subsequent project becomes easier to build, less risky, and less expensive. This pattern is already evident globally. The levelized cost of electricity from offshore wind globally fell by 62% between 2010 and 2024. Canceling projects or buying back leases eliminates the electricity those projects would have generated. It also slows the accumulation of experience, scale, and supply chain maturity that drives costs down over time. The result is higher costs for future projects and for electricity ratepayers. An energy crisis. Developing a robust offshore wind industry provides resilience in the face of an unstable global energy market. Future U.S. and global energy demand is projected to grow significantly, largely driven by the rapid expansion of AI data centers and electrification of vehicles, homes, and businesses. Limiting the supply of homegrown energy will increase energy costs for Americans, especially in the regions where the wind farms were supposed to be located: New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, and California. With the federal buyouts, the United States is losing 8 gigawatts of planned electricity generation, enough to power more than 3 million homes. That generation needs to be replaced by other energy sources and expanding power transmission lines that can take 7 to 10 years to get permits for and build out. The leased projects were on their way to providing new clean power generation fairly quickly. Eliminating them restarts the project clock. Reliance on dirtier conventional forms of power generation will increase along with foreign energy imports, such as electricity delivered from Canada to New York, leading to higher and more volatile electricity prices. Evidence from Europe shows that offshore wind can also reduce electricity costs for consumers by lowering wholesale prices and reducing dependence on fossil fuels and their volatile prices. Vineyard Wind 1, an offshore wind farm that completed in 2026, with 806 megawatts of generation, enough to power about 400,000 homes, is projected to save Massachusetts customers about $1.4 billion on electricity bills over the next 20 years. With a fixed price, 20-year contract, the project also lowered prices during cold snaps and peak demand for gas, reducing volatility and cost. From jobs to local economic development to power costs, we believe canceling these offshore wind projects is a bad deal for American taxpayers. Traveling with Dignity Act okayed. Improves restrooms for adults with disabilities. Legislation introduced in 2023 to help improve restrooms for adults with disabilities across New York State has finally made its way to Governor Kathy Hochul's desk, as both houses passed the bill recently. The Traveling with Dignity Act, sponsored by two Westchester County Democrats, would require the installation of adjustable adult changing facilities within enclosed restroom facilities for persons with disabilities, veterans, seniors, or other individuals, including roadside rest areas, museums, public libraries, and amusement attractions throughout New York. The common sense legislation will provide safer, more sanitary spaces for caregivers and family members assisting adults who need support, says Senator Pete Harckham, who sponsored the bill. It will benefit residents and visitors alike while advancing the respect, dignity, and inclusion that all New Yorkers deserve. Covered restroom facilities newly constructed on or after January 1, 2027, are required to include an adjustable adult changing facility under the legislation. The rules also apply to existing covered facilities undergoing renovations on or after that same date. All other facilities needing to meet this requirement will have a longer timeline, as they will have to comply by January 1, 2036. Adult changing stations may be invisible to those who do not need them, but they are essential for those who do, says Assemblymember Chris Burdick, who sponsored the bill. This legislation establishes one of the most comprehensive accessibility initiatives in the nation, covering public and private venues, stadiums, and much more. There are some exceptions to the requirement, which are as follows. If installation of an adjustable adult changing facility isn't feasible, if installation of the facility results in non-compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, if installation of the facility would destroy the historic significance of a historic property, if the total cost of the construction or renovation project connected to the restroom requirement doesn't exceed $20,000. Electronic adjustable tables retail for $8,000 to $10,000, and around $2,000 more would be needed to run electricity to the units at locations in need of it, according to nonprofit organization Constructive Partnerships Unlimited. It's unclear, however, who would be footing the bill for the devices. The passage of the Traveling with Dignity Act in both the New York State Senate and Assembly is a monumental step forward in ensuring that all New Yorkers can enjoy travel with independence, entertainment without limits, and access without barriers, says CP Unlimited President and CEO Joseph M. Pancari. Together, we are ensuring that everyone can truly travel with dignity, he added. Park visitors mock administration's campaign. The Trump administration asked visitors to federal parks to report any signs or displays that portray the nation in a negative light, and it got an earful. Some 35,000 comments poured in, and while a significant number of them were non-political in nature, copy-paste duplicates, jokes, memes, or submissions written by the same person, an overwhelming majority of the unique entries criticized the White House's effort to get rid of the national parks of woke ideology. The comments collected from June 4th, 2025 to January 14th, 2026 were in response to an executive order signed by President Donald Trump in the first few months of his second term that called on federal officials to scour monuments, memorials, and statues and remove language the administration said may inappropriately disparage Americans. To bolster that effort, the Interior Department put up what critics call snitch signs with QR codes in national parks to encourage visitors to report any signage that portrays Americans negatively or centers narratives about enslavement, land theft, or discrimination. Most of the comments with a partisan edge either take issue with the National Park Service campaign or mock it. Signs asking visitors to report negative stories about America are censorship and the rewriting of history. It's gross and embarrassing, just like how the world views Trump, one person commented. There's nothing that needs to be changed. This is a part of history. That should be remembered, especially because the current administration is intent on rewriting history. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Another commented, "I heard someone saying that the DEI Yeti lives here. Please look into this because it makes me feel racist." Some visitors criticized what they described as woke culture, though these comments represented a fraction of the responses. An interpretive sign at the North Carolina Monument on Seminary Ridge to provide context, added a couple of years ago regarding Confederate monuments and racism, is it really needed as several of the Confederacy were not fighting just for slavery, one person wrote. Perhaps the sign should be reviewed as it was clearly added under the last administration to be more woke. In a statement shared with USA Today, the Interior Department said that it worked to identify materials that might warrant clarification, and that elevating an item for consideration does not mean it violates the order, and it does not mean it will be changed. In the vast majority of cases across the system, flagged materials remain unchanged, the department said, adding, "We are not in the business of explaining the Trump derangement syndrome of others." Here is a representative sample of the comments, which have been minimally edited for clarity. On staffing, funding cuts. "Oh my God, the NPS is 1/16 of 1% of the national budget and generates so much more money for every dollar spent on the parks. Why are you so focused on slashing this? It will not fix anything. I'm begging, absolutely begging someone to use their brains, please. Buy like 2 less military planes and you've saved the same amount of money and solved. You're welcome. Leave the NPS alone. They do a good job. They need the employees and funding, not massive cuts to either. Stop firing NPS employees under the false guise of saving money. I live within 2 hours of 5 parks/monuments, and they are a huge part of my town's economy, especially the Grand Canyon. They employ so many people who are vital for the parks and monuments to actually run. DOJ shouldn't be cutting the NPS, and our administration needs to give them more funds and protect them for the public. Has anyone at Upper Admin visited the employee park housing and seen how run down some parks are?" On Stonewall, LGBTQ+ representation. Taking the T and Q, transgender and queer, out of the way this park tells the history of Stonewall is inaccurate and incomplete. Fix this. I'm upset to find that there is no information about the transgender people who led the riots at the Stonewall Inn. The people of color and LGBTQIA people who helped create this bar should fully be recognized for their impact on the history that happened here. I believe that this is something that should be repaired. Bisexual and transgender people were at the forefront of this history. We will not be erased. P.S. There is no such thing as the Stonewall community. We are LGBTQ+. On restoring truth and sanity to American history. Keep an accurate portrayal of American history in our national parks, even if it's not necessarily positive. These new signs to report anything that shows America in a negative light is incredibly weak. This is a weak man's request. Good Lord. This sign asking for sign or negative information about the past is the worst part. How dare you erase our country's history? How dare you create ignorance and racism? This sign inviting reporting of negative information deeply offends my sense of what it means to be an American. Our commitment to freedom and truth. This is outrageous and upsetting. Any initiative to erase diversity from the history of American parks is not only a waste of time, it does the American people a huge disservice in limiting the perspective of history. History is a tapestry of events resulting from many views from many different perspectives. Whitewashing history is akin to painting over classic works of art because some people would prefer to look at something else. On the institution of slavery. This site does not promote enough about slavery and its impact on the nation. What it has is excellent, but it isn't enough. Too much is overlooked. I'm an old white guy and I want more facts, not less. Why are you afraid of the truth? Please leave current exhibit about slavery during colonial era alone. The truth does not disparage. If true, it's history. Please protect the signs and information pertaining to slavery at the site of the former presidential house. These exhibits have been integral to my work with students. They benefit from learning about the role of enslaved people in our early history, especially the ways that enslaved people pushed for freedom. Exhibits about slavery are excellent teaching tools and need to remain in the park. On land theft, Native American history. Thank you, NPS staff, for keeping our history accurate. The U.S. military did massacre Native Americans at Sand Creek and elsewhere in the conquering of native lands as the U.S. expanded west. There is no other way to say it or explain it. Please keep telling the hard truths about our history. We are all humans, and humans make bad choices sometimes. We either learn from history or we repeat the same mistakes. It is important to preserve the accurate history of Sand Creek as a massacre site. A massacre perpetrated by the U.S. cavalry against Native Americans, mostly the elderly, women, and children. A marker referring to a supposed Sand Creek battleground was removed in recent years because this was not a battleground, but a massacre site. This marker must not be returned to the site, as might be required by the secretarial order from the current administration. Please do not try to whitewash the history of this site. Historical accuracy is important. Current political whims are not. Thank you. I did not appreciate the way that the National Park Service seems to have erased that this land was property of the Native Americans and their history is completely left out of all signage and displays. We are Americans. We do not erase our history. We own up to it and do better in the future. On supporting the effort to restore truth and sanity. This website contains opinions that the government should not be propagating. It is not a fact that South Carolina seceded to preserve slavery. It is biased as well because it reads like that was the only reason South Carolina seceded, which ignores other facts. It is also an opinion that Confederates firing on Fort Sumter was the opening of the Civil War. The paragraph in question is not based in history and should be rewritten. The display with gay and lesbian activists marching for equality should be taken down. This is woke propaganda and does not belong with the Liberty Bell displays. Recent staff from this park presented at the Gettysburg College Civil War Seminar. On behalf of NPS, they shared questionable educational program ideas on how to promote a woke ideology of American history. This is clearly in violation of the recent executive order. I hope this park is not conducting this kind of program. We should celebrate our nation and give a balanced view of history. This is clearly a modern, woke presentism viewpoint. I was deeply disappointed with the History at Sunset program at Old Salem Church. This is the description of the program. At the beginning of its history, Old Salem Church was a house of worship for a community of enslavers and the people they enslaved. And did they get that point across during the presentation? Every time they said enslaved or enslaver, I cringed. Wasn't the NPS directed not to use such inflammatory language? I felt ashamed of being white, which I guess is the point of the whole program. White equals bad. Why does the majority of Fredericksburg's programming end up being the same theme? White people are bad, especially white Southerners. Is there nothing else to talk about at the park? Is this an agenda-driven park? Why do all these audience-centered programs all seem to come back to this one theme, race? I'm very disappointed in the way my tax dollars are being spent. On the truly absurd. I was walking in the park today with my dog and a woman walked by with a friend, and she said, "The park is hotter than hell today. I am not sure if this is the type of thing you want to hear or not, but comparing our park to hell seems like something you would want to know. Thank you for your time." Gender-free language in New York family law bill under fire. Have the words mother and father been banned in New York, as some on social media have suggested? No, they have not even within state laws and regulations. That rumor, spread on social media, is based on a bill passed by the state legislature that does not make general neutral changes that does make gender-neutral changes to specific sections of state family law concerning child custody and, under current law, paternity testing. The gender-neutral language in the changes simply updates state law to bring it in line with language already used in other parts of family law and to address shifting definitions of parenthood already accepted in state courts, according to supporters. Not all parents are related to their children through genetics or adoption, especially given the ability of surrogacy and assisted reproduction, they say. And the new language particularly protects the rights of LGBTQ parents, supporters argue. The changes had been recommended by the state's Family Court Advisory and Rules Committee, which primarily includes judges. The changes include replacing the words paternity with parentage, changing the word mother to gestating parent, i.e. the one who gets pregnant and gives birth to a baby, changing the word father to non-gestating parent, and changing the phrase putative father to alleged parent. Terminology changes blasted. But some Republicans, including a few in Oneida and Herkimer counties, have lambasted the terminology changes as outrageous in their own right and as an outrageous waste of legislators' time given other issues still to be resolved in the final days of the legislative session. Their posts generally don't describe the context behind the changes and the limited sphere to which they apply. The bill, and rumors based on it, have received enough attention on social media for the fact-checking, rumor-busting website Snopes.com to post an article with detailed information on what the bill does and doesn't do. Oneida County Executive Anthony Picenti Jr., a Republican, was among those lambasting the bill on Facebook. In a sarcastic statement posted to his Facebook page on June 5th, Picenti criticized state Democrats for taking the time to pass this bill amending family law instead of working on other major issues in the state, such as fixing aging infrastructure, increasing mental health services, and fixing the educational system. They amended the law changing the definition of families, he said in the statement. Mother and father, which has worked since the beginning of time, is now gestating and non-gestating parents. Complete nonsense. It's an insane thing to spend even 1 second discussing, let alone actually making law. The Post does not mention that the changes only apply to a few specific parts of state law, and ends with Picenti noting his talk on that same day with 140 high school students about issues that matter to them. To no one's surprise, this didn't come up, Picenti said, ending the post. The bill, introduced in the Assembly by Representative Amy Paulin, Democrat of Scarsdale, and in the Senate by State Senator Louis Sepulveda, Democrat of the Bronx, passed 91-46 in the Assembly in March and 38-23 in the Senate in June. Governor Kathy Hochul has until the end of the year to sign it or veto it. A memo attached to the Assembly version of the bill describes the changing nature of parenthood in state law, noting that the Child Parent Security Act legalized gestational surrogacy arrangements in the state as of 2021. That act uses gender-neutral language, including the term acknowledgments of parentage. So the latest bill follows the lead on that act in its use of the term parentage, according to the memo. Courts in the state have already acknowledged the new definitions of parenthood, the memo noted. By adjusting language in the law, not only is it possible to make it more inclusive, the memo said, but it also determines the utilization of a term which encompasses a broader concept of parental care, not one strictly related to fatherhood. The bill would change some terminology in Section 5 of the Family Court Act, which has to do with the establishment of, for now, paternity. It would also substitute general neutral terminology in spots into the domestic relations law, the social services law, the civil practice law and rules, the judiciary law, the executive law, the general obligations law, the vehicle and traffic law, the alcoholic beverage control law, and the education law. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Local legislators criticize bill. State senators and assembly people representing parts of Oneida, Herkimer, and eastern Madison counties voted against the bill, including state senators Joseph Griffo, Republican of Rome, and Mark Walsick, Republican of Watertown, and Assembly members Marianne Butenshaw, Democrat of Marcy, Ken Blankenbush, Republican of Black River, Brian Miller, Republican of New Hartford, Robert Smullen, Republican of Gloversville, and Joe Angelino, Republican of Norwich. Smullen, who is running for the 21st Congressional District seat being vacated by Representative Elise Stefanik, Republican of Schuylerville, called the bill insane in a Facebook post June 3rd, and complained that Democrats bothered to pass it at a time when many New Yorkers are struggling to pay for groceries, rent, and taxes. These are the same crazy policies coming out of liberals in Congress, he wrote. Instead of focusing on the serious issues that should be tackled, they are pushing identity politics. Griffo also disparaged Democrats for taking time to pass the bill when so many other issues loom in the state. Parents aren't asking Albany politicians to rewrite the language of family, he wrote in a Facebook post June 6. They're asking for lower energy bills, safer communities, housing affordability, and relief from the crushing cost of living. Butenshaw, the only Democrat among local legislators, voted against her party on the bill. While I believe it is important to ensure that legislative terminology is consistent across all areas of law, Butenshaw said in a statement explaining her vote, I don't think this is the best approach to resolving this. Why recommend changes in bill? The Advisory Committee, a body made up primarily of judges, determined that the changes would eliminate some discrepancies in state family law and more accurately reflect the situations that the courts see every day. Those situations include babies born through assisted reproduction, which often uses donated embryos or sperm, and by surrogacy, the report noted. It called references to paternity, still in place throughout state statutes, archaic. Modernizing the terminology in the Family Court Act and other statutes is not simply a matter of semantics, as overly narrow interpretations of family fail to fully meet children's best interests, the report noted. It is time for New York State statutes to catch up with evolving definitions of parenthood, as well as advancing science. Enactment of the committee's measure would fulfill these goals. The committee included the recommendation in its January 2025 report to the chief administrative judge of the courts of the state of New York, noting that it had made the same recommendation in at least one past report as well. What did Snopes say? The website specifically addressed the claim that New York lawmakers passed a bill changing the words mother and father to gestational parent and non-gestational parent in part of state law. The Snopes article referred to online rumors and singled out one particular post on X by an account called @LibsoftTikTok, which posted June 5th about the language change, calling the situation insane. Democrats are destroying what it means to be a mother and father, the post said. That post was retweeted a number of times, sometimes with false embellishment, Snopes noted. One of those retweets said that New York has outlawed the terms mother and father, which Snopes debunked as untrue. But the basic claim about the bill changing the words mother and father in state law is true, Snopes determined. The article, though, provided a detailed explanation of the history behind the bill, the reasons proponents felt the changes were necessary, and the limited scope of those changes. It pointed out that the legalization of adoption by same-sex couples in 2010, of same-sex marriage in 2011, and of surrogacy agreements in 2021, along with advances in assisted reproduction, have already changed the legal definitions of what it means to be a parent in custody and child support cases. The article also pointed out that some other states, including California, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, have already updated their own family laws with similar gender-neutral language. Naked Dove Brewery closes after 15 years. Naked Dove Brewing Company is closing its doors after 15 plus years in operation, after a decision made with equal parts sadness and gratitude, according to a post on its Facebook page June 12th. This decision was not easy, but it is the right time for us to close this chapter. We're incredibly proud of what we've built together and the impact we've had on the community over these 15 years. The post signed by Dave, Don, and Ken reads, "The craft brewery's last day was planned to be June 14th, although it might remain open for a few more days if the beer holds out," the post reads. Ontario County's venerable craft brewery won numerous awards over the years in several different styles. Berry Naked Black Raspberry Ale, Nice and Naughty Christmas Ale, My Goat Bock Beer, 45 Fathoms Porter, and its Imperial Stouts were among the beers customers enjoyed either at its tap room on State Routes 5 and 20 or in other establishments that carried Naked Dove products. The post goes on to say, "When we opened, our goal was to brew world-class beers and share our passion for craft beer with our customers. But we received so much more. We could never have imagined the friendships and memories that would accompany the beer we brewed. For a decade and a half, you've celebrated with us, grown with us, and trusted us to fill your glasses and your lives with a little more joy. That's a gift we'll never forget." The owners thanked customers, past and present staff members, and the Finger Lakes beer community for making Naked Dove what it is. "Please know how grateful we are for every visit, every pint, and every cheers shared under our roof," the post reads. Naked Dove may be closing, but the memories and community we built together will always remain. The Naked Dove announcement is the latest in a series of closures. Copper Leaf Brewing Company in Pittsford, which opened in 2021 but closed under the original owners, closed once again earlier this year under new ownership. Rebel Sailor Brewing Company in Shortsville closed February 28th after 3 years in operation, and Trip Hammer Beer Works also closed February 28th after 9 years in operation in Fairport. Fifth Frame Brewing Company in Irondequoit announced its closure January 1st. K2 Brothers closed its second location at a former elementary school in Wayne County, and its Empire Boulevard taproom shut down in November. Naples Brewing Company in Ontario County and Heroes Brewing Company in Rochester also closed in 2025. On the flip side, DeWolf Brewing Company in Victor opened during the holidays last year and celebrated the opening last month. Wheelworks Brewing Company is preparing to open in Shortsville, perhaps as soon as this summer. In Palmyra, Drumlin's Brewing Company is expected to open this month. For many, Pulse Massacre 10 years ago a wake-up call. Victims, survivors honored through action. Bill McKay didn't know any of the 49 people who died at the hands of a gunman at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando on June 12, 2016, or any of the 58 additional people who were injured. "I didn't need to know them to feel the loss," said McKay, president of the Space Coast LGBTA Democratic Caucus. "Part of the strength of our community is the shared experiences of growing up in a world where we are viewed as different," McKay continued. "Each loss in our community is felt as the loss of a family member." And at the 10th anniversary of the massacre and beyond, what he can do, what everyone can do, McKay said, is honor them through action. Reflections and connections are flowing across Florida in events from public and private memorial services to art exhibits. Along with McKay, Florida Today talked with several residents of Brevard, Florida, who were spurred to action. McKay, 63, came out as a gay man in 1978. He lived through the early days of the fight for rights of our community, the hatred aimed at me and others related to coming out as a gay man, and surviving the AIDS crisis, he said. So, as the news broke about the Pulse shooting, McKay recalled, he was horrified, shocked, angry, but sadly not surprised. Looking back, he said, he can't help but view the Pulse massacre as a prelude to the decade to come. Unfortunately, he said, he believes Florida has been used as a proving ground for the rest of the nation. Our politicians have used the LGBTQ plus community to fuel fear in our state, he said. More recently, the transgender community, our most marginalized, has suffered the most. The reach of these laws can also spread to other areas such as gun rights, education, health, and personal liberty, McKay said. Human rights have always been my red line. We all deserve the same rights to exist and flourish as ourselves. You can only fear us if you don't know us, he said. Our community has been able to fight many, but not all of the bad legislative bills. This is how we honor the victims, by resisting and continuing the fight. Every loss of life is devastating. It is up to those of us that are still here to protect ourselves and secure a safe future for our youth. Do we get tired? Yes. Do we fight on? Yes. Failure is not an option. McKay's husband, Daniel McDowell, was elected to the West Melbourne City Council in 2020. He isn't sure he would have entered politics were it not for the wake-up call of June 12, 2016. He and McKay had just married in February of that year. They were, McDowell said, in our infancy stage of activism in supporting LGBTQ organizations. The massacre changed everything. We were full speed ahead, said McDowell, president of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. McDowell came out late in life. Not understanding the hate for my new family was disturbing, he said. Something needed to be done. I put my energies into the community and co-founded Awake Brevard. He became the first openly gay elected official in Brevard and is now a candidate for Florida House, saying he's running to have our voices heard. We cannot allow this hateful, destructive behavior to continue. We must join in solidarity. The thought of all these innocent people from all levels of society lost continues to drive McDowell, he said. We must fight for all marginalized communities. We must fight hate. Shelley Rodden recalls hearing about the Pulse shooting as she was driving back from Atlanta. I had never been to Pulse, but ironically had been chatting with a dear friend earlier in the evening about where we would go dancing in a safe environment. Pulse was mentioned, she said. We decided to check it out soon. Needless to say, upon hearing the details of the shooting, I felt numb. The whole thing felt surreal. I recall wearing a Gay Lives Matter shirt the next day and total strangers asking me if I was okay and if I needed a hug. I did. In the years since, Rodden said, she has dedicated her life to advocate for her LGBT plus community. She has helped organize rallies, marches, and safe social gatherings, and currently serves as youth director for Space Coast Pride, the largest LGBTQ plus organization in the area. Honoring those lost should never end, she said, and honoring them with action for gun reform should matter to everyone, not just the LGBTQ plus community. Area briefs. Thompson Health Guild in Canandaigua awards scholarships. The Thompson Health Guild awarded scholarships to 6 college-bound members of the class of 2026 at its annual dinner last month at Ferris Hills at Westlake. Each $2,000 scholarship went to a recipient majoring in a health-related field who must successfully complete their first college semester with the intent to continue in healthcare. The honorees are Julie Chen of Mid-Lakes High School, who plans to major in nursing at St. John Fisher University in Rochester, Maya Henry of Canandaigua Academy, who plans to major in public health and psychological sciences at Hobart and William Smith Colleges in Geneva, and Natalie Wu of Canandaigua Academy, who plans to major in pharmacy at the University at Buffalo. Also, Maya Stevenson of Mid-Lakes High School, who plans to major in physical therapy at Nazareth University in Rochester, Abel Yeshanu of Geneva High School, who plans to major in a radiologic technology at Monroe Community College in Rochester, and Haley Young of Minders Academy, who plans to major in physician assistant studies at Lemoyne College in Syracuse. Get your strawberry desserts at Ionia United Methodist Church. Ionia United Methodist Church's annual Strawberry Social will be held from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. June 18th, or until sold out at the church, 2120 Elton Road in the West Bloomfield hamlet of Ionia. Guests can dine in or take out is available. The menu includes hot dogs, hamburgers, sausages, salads, and desserts such as strawberry shortcake, strawberry sundaes, and chocolate sauce over vanilla ice cream. Items are priced a la carte. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Freedom Walk 2026 honors Underground Railroad legacy. Freedom Walk 2026, a 750-mile modern-day pilgrimage retracing historic Underground Railroad routes from Maryland to Canada, is expected to arrive soon in Farmington with a public gathering at the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meeting House Museum planned on Juneteenth. The Farmington stop brings the journey directly into one of the most historically significant locations along the Underground Railroad corridor in New York. The Meeting House, long associated with abolitionist activity and reform movements, will serve as a focal point for community reflection, education, and public participation as the walk continues north toward Canada. All programs are free and open to the public. What is Freedom Walk 2026? Freedom Walk 2026 marks the 250th anniversary of American independence by honoring the legacy of self-liberators, abolitionists, and the networks that helped guide enslaved people to freedom. The journey is designed not only to preserve history, but to use it as a catalyst for truth-telling, dialogue, and civic engagement. Led by historian Anthony Cohen, who first walked the route in 1996, participants will travel 750 miles by foot, boat, and rail, intentionally using the same modes of transportation available to 19th century freedom seekers. The walk began May 4th in Sandy Spring, Maryland, and will conclude July 4th in Ontario, Canada. At the center of the pilgrimage is the Harriet Tubman Journey to Freedom statue, a large bronze sculpture created in 2019 by artist Wesley Wofford. The sculpture, pulled by a truck, accompanies the walk as a focal point for reflection, dialogue, and collective engagement with the ongoing struggle for freedom and justice. For those interested in joining Cohen and the Freedom Walkers as they make their way through the Finger Lakes, visit www.menair.org/freedomwalk2026-join to register. What events are happening in Farmington? The 1816 Farmington Quaker Meeting House and Museum will welcome Cohen and fellow walkers with a free public program that includes tours, music, living history, and community fellowship on the Juneteenth holiday, June 19th. An open house and tours of the 1816 Meeting House, as well as viewing of the Tubman statue, are planned from 2 to 5 p.m. A strawberry social hosted by Farmington Friends is planned from 5 to 7 p.m. Cohen will give a presentation at 7 p.m. As part of the program, Farmington Friends will perform abolitionist songs and special appearances by portrayers of the freedom seeker Austin Stewart and General Gordon Granger, who grew up nearby and later issued the order in Galveston, Texas, that announced emancipation and gave rise to the Juneteenth observance, are planned. More events to know about. WXXI Connections host Evan Dawson will feature Cohen in conversation with Norm Struthers, AKWAABA, the Heritage Associates, Christine Ridarsky, Rochester and Monroe County historian, and Judith Wellman, Historical New York Research Associates. The radio program will air at 1 p.m. June 18th. The Harriet Tubman statue will be featured at the 1816 Farmington Meeting House information table during the community band concert at 5:30 p.m. June 18th at Erie Canal Park in Macedon, Wayne County. A gathering of women will be held from 10 a.m. to noon June 20th at Memorial AME Zion Church, 549 Clarissa Street, Rochester. Living history portrayals of Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Anna Murray Douglas, and Harriet Jacobs, along with a tour of the church's historic stained glass windows, will be featured. The Harriet Tubman statue will be on public display during the Rochester International Jazz Festival from 1 to 9 p.m. June 20th at 285 East Main Street, Rochester. Judge orders halt to censorship at parks. A federal judge ordered the Trump administration on June 12th to reinstall exhibits and signs on topics such as slavery and climate change that it had removed from parks and monuments nationwide because they do not align with its preferred narrative. U.S. District Judge Angel Kelly in Boston issued a preliminary injunction at the behest of groups representing park conservationists, historians, and scientists, saying the Interior Department's actions under President Donald Trump set a dangerous precedent of censorship and sanitization. The National Parks Conservation Association, American Association for State and Local History, and 4 other groups had argued that the Interior Department was removing signs and exhibits in violation of congressional mandates governing how the 433 national park sites should be operated. Kelly agreed, saying the government had removed dozens of signs at National Park Service managed sites related to climate change, civil rights, and diverse communities without authorization from the National Park Service Organic Act, the National Park Service Centennial Act, and the National Parks Omnibus Management Act. History cannot be faithfully told while excluding the experiences of communities whose contributions, struggles, and achievements form an important part of our nation's story, she wrote. Kelly, who was appointed by Democratic President Joe Biden, ordered the signs and exhibits restored within 21 days by the 250th anniversary to properly honor the remarkable achievements of the United States. The Interior Department in a statement, called Kelly a liberal activist judge and said it was reviewing its options to appeal. The lawsuit challenged Interior Secretary Doug Burgum's implementation of an executive order Trump signed in March 2025, targeting what the Republican president called a revisionist movement that portrayed the United States as inherently racist, sexist, oppressive, or otherwise irredeemably flawed. Trump's order directed the Interior Department to make changes to parks, monuments, and memorials to address any false revision of history that the White House said had occurred in recent years. Among the materials that were later removed were an exhibit at Philadelphia's Independence National Historical Park describing the ownership of enslaved people by George Washington, the nation's first president, and signage detailing climate threats at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Kelly cited those as some of the many examples of signs, displays, and exhibits being removed from parks under Trump that do not align with its preferred narrative, thereby telling half-truths. Sky Perryman, whose liberal legal group Democracy Forward represented the plaintiffs, said Kelly's decision not only stopped further censorship, but recognized the need to restore the exhibits the administration already illegally removed. Iran questions U.S. commitment to peace. Tehran decries Israel's attacks on Lebanon. Iran's top negotiator questioned the United States' commitment to peace efforts after Israel carried out new attacks on Lebanon, dimming prospects of Tehran and Washington signing a framework agreement on June 14th on ending their war. President Donald Trump and mediator Pakistan said on June 13th that they expected the deal would be signed the next day, but Tehran cast doubt over the timing and hardline protesters in Iran voiced opposition. Qatari negotiators flew to Tehran on the morning of June 14th as part of an effort to finalize the agreement, a source with knowledge of the situation told Reuters. But Iranian negotiator Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said Israel's June 14th attack on the southern suburbs of Beirut, which Israel said targeted Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants, showed the United States lacked the will or ability to fulfill its commitments. If you lack the will and ability to fulfill your commitments, speaking of continuing the path is not possible, he wrote on X, in an apparent reference to peace moves. Mohammad Jafar Assadi, deputy commander of Iran's top joint military command, was quoted by state media as saying Israeli crimes in Beirut's southern suburbs would not go unanswered. Strikes on Lebanon. The U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, launched on February 28th, has stoked conflict between Israel and Iran-aligned Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Israel has said it is not party to the planned U.S.-Iran deal. The Israeli military said on June 14th that Hezbollah had launched 3 projectiles toward communities in northern Israel in violation of a ceasefire in Lebanon. Israel then fired at what it called Hezbollah targets in the Da'iya neighborhood of Beirut in an attack that Lebanon's civil defense said killed 3 people. Fox News quoted an unidentified diplomat involved in the talks as saying the Israeli strikes were complicating efforts to finalize the U.S.-Iran deal and describing them as an attempt to sabotage those efforts. Israel did not immediately respond to the assertion. Israel has said it will retain freedom of operations in Lebanon, while Tehran has made a full ceasefire there an important component of its demands. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also clashed with Trump over U.S. demands that Israel curb military action in Lebanon to allow Washington to reach a deal with Tehran. Uncertainty over timing. Thousands of people have been killed, mostly in Iran and Lebanon, since the U.S. and Israel began strikes on Iran. Iran has struck Israel and Persian Gulf states that host U.S. bases and has effectively blockaded the Strait of Hormuz, a vital artery for global oil supplies. The blockade has pushed up global energy prices, while the U.S. Navy has blocked Iranian ports. Trump posted on June 13th that the deal with Iran was scheduled to be signed the following day, his 80th birthday. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said Islamabad was preparing for an electronic signing, to be followed by technical-level talks in the coming week. But Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei, speaking before Trump's post, was quoted by state media as saying it would not be on June 14th, although it could happen in the coming days. Iran's Fars news agency, citing an informed source, said on June 14th that Tehran had not yet made a final decision on the framework agreement, with reviews of its political, legal, and technical aspects ongoing at expert and decision-making levels. A senior Iranian official told Reuters that, under the terms of the draft deal, the U.S. would agree to release $25 billion of frozen Iranian assets, while Tehran would agree not to produce or acquire nuclear weapons. U.S. focuses on opening Strait. Trump wrote on Truth Social that after a framework deal is signed, the Strait of Hormuz would immediately be open to all. Once the strait reopens, the United States would lift its naval blockade, sources on all sides said. Negotiations over Iran's nuclear program would take place afterward. While U.S. and Israeli bombing has heavily degraded Iran's military-industrial base and damaged its military, experts say the war has entrenched the dominance of Iran's hardline Revolutionary Guard Corps. While the U.S. and Israel launched the war, Trump called on Iranians to rise up and take over state institutions. Even as the U.S. and Iran appeared to be moving toward an agreement over the past few days, clashes have continued. At pro-government rallies across Iran late June 13th, residents and news agencies reported that hardliners opposed to the framework agreement loudly voiced their dissatisfaction. Nuclear issue. Draft terms of the agreement, described to Reuters by multiple sources, indicate the United States would begin releasing frozen Iranian assets and waive sanctions on its oil exports in return for Iran opening the strait. Iran's nuclear program would be addressed during a 60-day period of talks. A senior Iranian official told Reuters on June 14th that Iran agreed to maintain the nuclear status quo, including no uranium enrichment or expansion of nuclear facilities, until a final deal was reached. A U.S. official said the agreement would ultimately lead to the dismantling of Iran's nuclear program, with its stockpile of highly enriched uranium to be destroyed and removed. The senior Iranian official said the draft deal would allow Iran, which denies seeking a nuclear bomb, to dilute its enriched uranium inside the country. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, June 15th issue of the Democrat Chronicle. Your reader has been Jackie Cohen. Thank you for listening.